The wisest man in Rome was ordered to kill himself, Seneca, and the curse of being right. A man opens his own veins because an emperor told him to. He does not beg. He does not run. He asks for a blade, a hot bath, and begins dying slowly, as if this were simply one more lesson left to teach. But there is something in this scene you have already lived. On a smaller scale, the moment being indispensable stopped protecting you and started condemning you. Seneca was not Nero's enemy. He was the man who taught him how to speak before the Senate. He was the man writing the speeches, steadying the young emperor's pulse when the impulse came too early, managing the chaos with the calm of someone who had already seen everything. For years, Rome was governed, in practice, by Seneca and by Burrus, the praetorian prefect. Nero wore the crown. They held the judgment. And, for a while, it worked well enough that historians would later call that stretch the Golden 5 Years. You know this structure, maybe not from Rome, but from an office, a family, a marriage. There is always someone holding up what another person only pretends to control. And for a while, that someone is irreplaceable. People say it with admiration. I don't know what we'd do without you. They do not realize they are describing, without meaning to, a suspended sentence. Because Nero grew up. And a man who grows up in the shadow of a tutor does not feel gratitude for long. He feels shame. The shame of having needed someone. And shame, once it matures in a man with absolute power, does not turn into humility. It turns into resentment with a fixed address. But the part that should disturb you is not the order to die, it is the reason behind it. Seneca was not killed because he failed. He was killed because he kept on knowing too much about how Nero had become who he was. He had seen the early signs, the cruelty still contained, the jealousy toward his adopted brother Britannicus, the growing contempt for his mother, Agrippina, whom Nero would later have killed himself. Seneca had been in the room where those decisions were born, or close enough to it. And a man who was close to the origin of a monster carries, forever, the memory of when that monster was still small enough to be corrected. This is unbearable for someone in power. Not the fact of having once been seen weak. The fact that somewhere, someone still remembers. Watch the next scene closely, because this is where most people misread the history. Around the age of 60, Seneca tried to leave. He went to Nero and offered to hand back the fortune he had accumulated in his service, the villas, the land, the gold, asking only for permission to withdraw from public life, to disappear quietly. This was not weakness. It was the most lucid attempt at survival a man in his position could make. Nero refused, with performed affection, saying he could not bear to lose his advisor. The words were gentle. The message was not, "You do not leave this relationship. I decide when it ends." Here is the sickness this story is named for. It is not power that destroys the indispensable man. It is the impossibility of ceasing to be indispensable when the person who made you that way still needs you to exist, not to help, but to be controlled. Your usefulness stops being a tool you hold. It becomes a leash held by someone else. Seneca, the Stoic, had written about exactly this before he lived it. He said that no man is free who is enslaved to his own position, his own reputation, his own usefulness in another man's eyes. He wrote about the shortness of life while spending his own managing the moods of a tyrant still under construction. And perhaps this is the coldest irony in the whole story. The man who taught detachment in his pages was the same man who could not detach himself in time. Because knowing the truth and being able to act on it are different things, you can recognize, with total philosophical precision, that you are tied to something that will consume you and still stay. Because leaving has an immediate cost, and staying only has a future one, abstract enough for the mind to keep underestimating. In the year 65, the Pisonian conspiracy emerged a plot to kill Nero and place another man on the throne. There is no solid proof Seneca was part of it, but he did not need to be part of it. He only needed to be the kind of man who, if the plot succeeded, would naturally be invited to help govern beside the new emperor, for the simple reason that he already knew how. That alone was the verdict. Nero needed no evidence. He needed only to remember that Seneca knew too much to keep living near any throne. The order arrived through an officer, without ceremony. Seneca received the news at dinner, with the same composure he had spent a lifetime teaching others to receive it with. He asked to write his will, He was refused. He told the friends around him that since he could leave them no property, he would leave the one thing still his to give the example of how to die. He opened the veins in his arms and legs. The blood, slowed by age, would not come fast enough. He took poison. His body, hardened by years of austere stoic discipline, resisted that too. Finally, he was carried into a hot steam bath, so the heat could finish what his own body, with quiet stubbornness, kept refusing to surrender. There is something almost unbearable in that detail. The man died slowly because he had trained his body to endure. The same discipline that made him indispensable to Nero for decades was the very thing that drew out his death by Nero's order. And this is where the story stops being about Rome. Because you do not need an emperor to live this structure. You only need someone, a boss, a partner, a figure of authority inside your own home who depends on you enough to keep you close and is proud enough never to forgive you for it. The person who knows too much about how you became who you are is rarely rewarded for that memory. More often, they are quietly eased out, or silenced, or discarded the moment they seem about to become free. Seneca did not die for being wrong. He died for having been right too early, about a man who could not stand to be reminded of who he was before the throne. Think of who, in your own life, keeps you close, not for your company, but for your memory, for what you have seen, for what you know about how they were built. And ask yourself, with the same coldness Seneca used when he wrote, what happens on the day that person decides they no longer need to be remembered?